Hello, once again, everyone. Back to SEC Mafia, a football podcast. Been a couple of weeks, been off for a couple of weeks due to our scheduling, of course, and the putting together of our minds for creative content, and just how now we're in the off season, dreaded 7 months with no meaningful football, especially now. NFL finished off their season last night with the big big Super Bowl. Roll Eagles roll, I guess you could say, with 7 former Alabama players on their team, and quite frankly, a lot of SEC former SEC football players playing in the Super Bowl. For the most part, it was fairly pretty good. I thought the Super
Yeah,
Bowl.
it was good. It was good because the Chiefs got their ass beat in, and it's almost like Philadelphia, the last 4 or 5 years, has sat back and looked at the landscape of college football and said, Alabama's been really good. They've got good players. Georgia's been really good. They've got good players. Let's go get a bunch of those guys and see how they do in the NFL. And it turns out they do pretty well.
Absolutely. SEC just means more down here. The quality of competition. You go across the NFL and you ask any of their general managers, you ask any of the head coaches, and they will tell you the SEC players are the most prepared for the NFL.
Absolutely. And the draft shows that. I mean, the latest mock drafts that I'm seeing are showing that there will be anywhere between 10 and 15 SEC players taken in the first round. The Big Ten is coming on. They have definitely picked up their standard the last few years. Ohio State, Michigan mainly carrying the flag for that conference. But yeah, SEC players generally they do well in the NFL, and the draft shows that, and the amount of contracts that they sign and extensions show that. And when you look at key players all over the NFL, I mean, really and truly, any position you want to look at, you can look at the SEC and say, the SEC has the top talent at every single position in the NFL.
Yep, absolutely. And so with that, guys, SEC Mafia contact information here on the screen. Don't really have to go into detail on that. We already know about all of this. So if you please would like and subscribe and follow us on every platform that we have. We just love to engage with our audience. I know it's a boring time right now, but we're going to try to stay engaged with as much topics as we can throughout this off season. Going to try to get into some portal news and things like that. So please just keep following us, keep liking us on our Facebook and X and YouTube videos and things like that, guys.
Here's really a good time for this show to pick up a little bit of steam. A lot of shows, as soon as college football season ends, they take a 6 or 7 month hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to step back a little bit and not do a show every single week, but we are going to put a show out every other week so that there is some type of college football content. We know that college football is king in the South. Everyone loves their favorite teams, and we're going to keep giving you a little bit of content for that. So y'all stick with us.
For sure. And with that, guys, we're still in our rankings and doing the highs of highs and lowest of lows for each of the 16 teams. We already covered Texas A&M, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss in our last episode. Got 4 pretty good slate of teams for you today. We're going to start with the worst first this week. I know we did worst last episode. And so with that, we bring you up the Kentucky Wildcats, 4-8 for the year, 1-7 in the SEC. Not great. Which now I will say of the schedules, theirs was pretty tough. I mean, they had to play Georgia, South Carolina, Vandy, Ole Miss, Florida, Auburn. So a little bit tougher road on their schedule, but they were predicted top 10 this year back in August.
Top 10. What did I miss?
Like not top 10 in the SEC. Like there was the ESPN. Okay. Yeah, there was the ESPN predictor out for them to finish top 10 in the SEC this year.
I was about to say, I know we're in the off season, but it sounds like your mind has went into off season mode. When I heard Kentucky top 10, I'm thinking, in what world were they projected? But going back to your point about the schedules, every team they played, with the exception of Murray State, who was their Division two school, every other team that they played and every team in the SEC that they played went to a bowl game with the exception of Auburn. So out of their 8 SEC conference foes, 7 of them went to a bowl game, including Tennessee and Georgia, who both made the playoffs. So like you said, they had a pretty brutal schedule. As far as the highest of highs for them, I know in our pre-meeting we discussed this, and we always try to come up with different points. But really and truly, when it comes to this Kentucky team, I'm sure we're going to have the same high for the same high for the season. It's got to be Ole Miss, because that was really all they had to hang their hat on this year.
Yeah, that's what I put as well. It was Coach Stoops. I mean, he finally had that big top 10 win on the road against a tough opponent in a tough environment. And so that, I mean, for me, that had to be the highest of the highs.
And it's kind of crazy when you look at Kentucky. They opened up with a win against Southern Miss, lost to South Carolina, lost a 1-score game to Georgia that if Mark Stoops would have had any intestinal fortitude and went for it on a couple of 4th downs and converted, could have beat Georgia and really got his big-time win while at Kentucky. But then they rattle off 2 wins. They beat Ohio and they beat Ole Miss, and they pick up a little bit of steam, and then they end up losing 6 of their next 7. It just really went into the basement after that Ole Miss game, which is kind of strange when that was their biggest moment, their biggest win of the season, that immediately following that, their season just goes down the drain.
Yeah, I think they had all their stake in that Ole Miss win, and I guess that just was their Super Bowl this year.
And what was crazy about it was the win was at Ole Miss nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the road at Von Braun.
Fought Hemingway.
Not Von Braun. Not a big place, but it gets packed in there. It gets loud. It gets tight.
Oh, yeah.
Ole Miss fans are rowdy. We know that firsthand. Lowest of lows for them had to be losing to Auburn at home, and just the sheer lack of defense and no adjustments to stopping Jarquez Hunter that game.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Not only did they have Jarquez Hunter run wild on them, but in the first quarter, they came out and lit the world on fire, jumped up to a 10-0 lead, and really looked like they were going to put it on Auburn. And after they got up 10-0, it was just a Jarquez Hunter show. He ran wild for nearly 300 yards in that game.
Mm-hmm. When you're looking at final grades, like we said on last episode, it's very individualized, just based off, preseason indicators, individual team strength of schedules. I had to give them a D minus, just based upon their ESPN predictor for the SEC to finish at 10th, and then they go out and they finish dead last. I almost gave them an F, but they did have a tougher schedule. They kept it close with Georgia and a few other teams, and they won the games, the non-conference that they're supposed to win, other than Louisville. So I had to give them a D minus.
Right. My lowest of low, going back to it real quick for Kentucky, was just their quarterback play this year. They had 3 quarterbacks who took over 50 snaps and 3 quarterbacks who attempted at least 39 passes. All 3 of those quarterbacks completed less than 58% of the passes that they attempt. And that number's really inflated by the Southern Miss and Murray State games. Had it not been for those games in SEC play, all 3 of those guys would have been under 53%. So their quarterback play was atrocious. 3 quarterbacks combined for 16 interceptions and only 15 touchdowns. You're not going to win very many games in the SEC with that type of quarterback play, and they didn't. They only got 1. So my low would be their quarterback play for this season. And I'm right there with you for their letter grade for the season. I give them a D minus as well. The only thing that kept me from giving them a straight up F was upsetting Ole Miss.
Yep. Yeah, that kept them off the edge for me, because they were about to get a 59.4.
That's what I'm talking about.
No, I'm just kidding. We love you, Kentucky fans. Big Razorbacks. Sam Pittman. Got a lifeline. Got a lifeline this year. 7-6 for the year. 3-5 in the SEC. Not so high there. Go ahead, Mr. Randy, with your thoughts.
My highest of high is Sam Pittman saving his job. And some Arkansas fans, they may not be too excited about that. I know there's kind of a mixed bag out on Sam Pittman. It seems like Sam Pittman is one of those intriguing characters that if he's not your coach, you love him. You love to hear him talk. You love to hear him rally the troops. You love to hear his speeches and his shenanigans. But I get the sense from a lot of Arkansas fans that they're growing tired of the Sam Pittman shtick. And this year coming up is going to be a big year for them in which they're wanting to see this team take the next step. But as of this year, like I said, my highest of highs going 7-6, saving his job, getting retained for another year, pulling the big upset against an 8-win Texas Tech team in a bowl game in which not many people gave them a chance. And not only did they win, but they won by 2 scores, 39-26. So my highest of highs is finishing the year with a winning record, Sam Pittman saving his job, and capping it off with a bowl win.
Yeah, my highest of highs was stuck between the 2 wins you've already discussed, or at least one of the wins. It was between Tennessee and Texas Tech, and I went with the Tennessee win. I mean, just because of the sheer magnitude of that win. I think Tennessee was ranked, 6th or 7th at that time? Yep. And just to beat a top 10 opponent at home, fans going crazy. I mean, that was a good signature win this year for that program and for Sam Pittman. And that's got to be my highest of high. Lowest of low kind of ties into what you were saying about Texas Tech, or the bowl game against Texas Tech, and nobody giving them a chance. My lowest of low for them is their transfer portal blues that they're having. They have some like 30 players that have hit the portal and that have signed with other teams so far in this offseason. And, you know, as we've talked about for countless times, it's so hard to maintain depth on these middle-of-the-road teams because so many guys on these middle-of-the-road teams, like your 2 and 3 guys, they know they can play elsewhere. And when the offseason comes, they hit the portal and they go try to find somewhere where the grass is a little bit greener. And so it's hard for teams like Arkansas to maintain depth and keep quality depth on your roster. And so that's what makes it so hard for coaches nowadays to try and essentially buy and re-recruit your players that are already on your team.
Well, everyone is going to struggle with maintaining depth. And here's what I've learned about the portal. And here's the way I take it. Whomever you may be a fan of, from UAB to Ohio State,
mm-hmm.
You're going to lose guys in the portal every single year. Some years you may lose 5. Some years you may lose 25. Mm-hmm. Don't freak out over the number of portal entrances. Here's where you should freak out, and here's why I would freak out if I was an Arkansas fan. It's not that they lost nearly 30 players. I mean, Tennessee and Alabama have lost right at 20 this year. They've lost a lot of guys to the portal, and it's exactly like you say. It's guys that are into their sophomore and junior season, and they realize that their eligibility is running up within a couple of years, and they want to go somewhere and play and try to put something on a resume to try to get to the next level, or they want to play and try to make NIL money. It's not the number of transfers. It's when you start having starters transfer. And when you look at Arkansas losing a couple of offensive linemen to the portal, losing a starting tight end to the portal, they're losing starters on defense, starting linebackers and defensive linemen to the portals. When you start losing those starters, that's when you need to start freaking out. That's when you need to start saying, man, what's going on? Not when you have a wide receiver room that's 15 guys deep and only 4 guys can get on the field at the same time, and all of a sudden you lose 4 or 5 guys in the portal. There's no reason to freak out when 4 guys that are never going to see the field hit the portal. Okay, that's not something to freak out about. But when you start losing offensive linemen and key players and key contributors, that's when you should worry, and that does worry me a bit for Arkansas. So I definitely agree with your lowest of low. My lowest of low came early in the season when they lost to Oklahoma State. They were up 21-7 at halftime, up 21-10 midway through the third quarter, and they lost 39-31. They outgained Oklahoma State by 300 yards. Outgained them 648-385. It was about 260 yards, but nearly outgained them by 300 yards and lost.
Almost had 700 yards of offense that game.
Yes.
I mean, that is crazy.
Yes, but got to overtime, held Oklahoma State, got the ball, could not score and win the game. Then Oklahoma State scored in the first possession. Then Arkansas was not able to score, and they ended up losing in the second overtime. But just a weird game. But losing to a 3-9 Oklahoma State and outgaining them by nearly 300 yards was my lowest of low.
Yeah, that was the game that, and we saw this problem for the remainder of the season was Arkansas could not stop big plays, and that was relevant in their third down percentage because Oklahoma State only had like a 33% on their third down conversions that game. It's just that they were getting the first and second down and then throwing the ball deep, and Arkansas was having trouble that the rest of the second half stopping big plays. That was that was a crazy game. Yeah, I definitely agree with that low. I was a little bit more lenient on my final grade. Just because in August they were predicted to finish 13th in the SEC. They ended up being it was one of those that was like tied for 7th or 8th, but I want to say like by numerical standpoint and digging deeper into like, the point system and stuff like that, they finished 11th. So, they finished better than what they were predicted. They did have a tough schedule with Texas, LSU, Texas A&M. That half of the schedule was pretty tough on them. And to have a winning record and Sam Pittman saving his job, I gave him just a flat B.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
And especially going from 4-8 last year, 7-6 this year with a bowl win, that's improvement. And I think it's a deserving of a B.
Yeah, I agree with you. When it comes to how I grade these teams, I'm not necessarily just saying, well, they went 7-6. That's an average. I'm like you. I'm looking at what they were projected to do.
Yeah.
Did they overachieve? Did they underachieve? I think that Arkansas slightly overachieved. I know a lot of projections that I saw had them going 5-7 or 6-6. I think getting Bobby Petrino back was good for them. Their offense picked up some momentum. Taylor Green come on the scene and looked pretty good for them. So I'm with you. I had them as a B plus, and that's strictly because of what they were projected in the beginning of the year. Beat Tennessee and got a momentum, a big win, gained some momentum from that Tennessee win, won a bowl game. So yeah, I gave them a B plus.
Yeah, and I think whenever you look at the different teams, you have to take all those factors into account because you can't just, I think I heard a quote one time and it says, you can believe what your record is, or you can dive deeper and actually see the contents of that record. And he was talking about in context of Indiana. And I think at the end of the season, you kind of have to look. You can't just look at a flat record and say, oh, that team was pretty good. Okay, well, who did they play? What were they projected to do prior to the season? What was their strength of schedule, the quality of opponents, and things like that? And what was the talent level of their team? And I think you have to take into account all those factors, especially in the SEC, when grading postseason like this.
Well, that's like the old saying, where a lot of broadcasters and such will say that you are what your record says you are. I don't necessarily agree with that. Not all schedules are identical, and not all teams are identical, and not all expectations are identical.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Now, on to one of our highly touted, explosive, momentum gainers towards the end of the year in the SEC, South Carolina Gamecocks. Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks went 9-4 on the year. Sort of a disappointing loss in the bowl game. It was still a great atmosphere of a bowl game. 5-3 in the SEC. Go ahead with your highs of highs.
Yeah, my highs, just being in SEC country, has to deal with rivalry games. I've always kind of looked, especially the last 10, 15 years, the way Clemson has come on, won 2 national titles. You kind of look at Clemson as being the superior team in that state. You can call South Carolina the little brother or whatnot if you want to. But for me, rivalry games always take precedence. My highest of high has to be them going into Clemson and knocking off the ACC champion the week before the ACC championship, 17-14.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that was just another factor in, towards the end of the year when everybody was saying that the ACC deserved 2 spots and Clemson had just lost to Georgia and South Carolina both times they played an SEC opponent. My highest of high is 2. I have 2 for them. One is obvious, the Texas A&M game, to where you really saw them come into form. That was on their second game of their big 6-win streak after they had beaten Oklahoma on the road. That night game just really solidified their case in becoming, one of the top runners in the SEC. 408 yards of offense. Rocket Sanders that game. 20 carries, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns. And not only that, getting into the passing game as well. 5 catches for 92 yards. That had to be the highest of the highs. And my other half of the highest of highs for them is the defensive line. Just the steady flow and the amount of talent they had on the defensive line and the quality of play that they played with every game. That was definitely a high for them this season.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The second half of that Texas A&M game was when they really, like you said, started their run. They were tied 20-20 at halftime and just absolutely took over the second half against Texas A&M and won 44-20. And their defensive line, like you said, was phenomenal. And not that I'm looking ahead to next year because we're going to do our projections and stuff later. But one thing I would caution everyone is to not get too high on South Carolina for next year. Yes, I know they've got Lenore Sellers back. Yes, I know they've got the big receiver back, Harbor. They've got some guys that are phenomenal, but their defensive line really looked pedestrian in the bowl game. I get them mixed up. Was Kennard is he the one that, or Stewart? No, Stewart's the one that opted out, right? Kennard was the freshman, or if I got him backwards?
Backwards. Stewart was the freshman. Kennard opted out.
Yeah, so when Kennard opted out, their defensive line really looked pedestrian in the bowl game, and that kind of leads me to believe that they might not be the media darling. I've seen a lot of projections where people are projecting them to make the 12-team playoff next year. I'm just not so sure about that.
We'll see. We shall see. Schedules are very similar next year, just flip-flop. So they'll have a tough schedule next year. Similar opponents, just swap the places that you're playing them at. Final, or did we do lows yet? No,
we didn't do low.
What's your low? Go ahead. I'll do my low. Really could have been a high for me. We were discussing in our pre-meeting how it could have been a high for me, but low was Shane Beamer almost channeling his inner Muhammad Ali in the bowl game and embarrassing himself against Brett Bielema. That was my low.
Yeah, that was one of those things to where I wish they would have just kind of turned
into
a hockey game. Yeah, just turn into a hockey game and let them go. But I will say this, going back and watching that game, that was probably the rowdiest, most intense bowl game, excluding all the playoff games. But just the way the fans got into that, the way the coaches were into it for what everyone says is a meaningless bowl game, that turned out to be a phenomenal game and a lot of passion and intensity in that game. My lowest of low for South Carolina had to be the LSU game. That was the game that ultimately kept them out of the playoffs. Lenore Sellers ended up getting hurt. There were some questionable calls from the officials in that game. They ended up losing by a field goal and ultimately, like we said, kept them out of the playoffs. Had they beat LSU and finished 10-2, they easily make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Final grade for them. I was so close. They almost broke into A range. I had to give them an 89.44. And for those of you who don't know, 0.44, you cannot round it up, but it is so close to being able to be rounded up. 89.44, B plus. Just because of, yes, they did get hot. Yes, the level of competition was still there, and the talent that they had on the defensive line was there. But they were predicted to go like one of the worst teams in the SEC. I want to say they were predicted number 14th at the beginning of the season, and
Yes.
they finished tied for 5th, 5-3, same as Alabama, same as Ole Miss, same as all these SEC blue bloods that have contended for the SEC every year. So I think that Shane Beamer did a phenomenal job, and the way that he brought his guys together, and almost making it to an SEC championship game. They're deserving of a B+ this year.
Yeah, I went and pulled the trigger and gave them the A-. Whenever you look at their schedule, how they beat Kentucky, they beat Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri. Texas A&M was ranked at the time. Missouri finished with 10 wins. Clemson finished with 10 wins, won the ACC, made a playoff game. Those were some big-time wins. Whenever you factor in their preseason projections, they were projected right around that 5-7, 6-6. You know, the question coming into the season was going to be, can they make a bowl game? If they make a bowl game at 6-6, is it enough to save Shane Beamer's job? He was kind of riding the hot seat a little bit, and for them to just blow expectations out of the water and win 9 games and reel off the wins against Clemson, Missouri, and Texas A&M, I'll pull the trigger and give them an A-.
I wanted to, but the way that they finished against Illinois, I just couldn't. It held me back. Yeah, great season for them. Looking forward to what they have in store next year. Who knows? Who knows? Which brings us to our last team of the day of the episode, Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia is on my mind. 11-3. 6-2 in the SEC. The Georgia Bulldogs are your 2024 SEC champions.
Yeah, my highest of high for Georgia is the continuation of their dominance over some of their rivals, reeling off 4 straight against Florida in the world's largest cocktail party, as we will still call it by its deserving name, and then 8 straight against Tennessee. Again, these are 2 rivals that Georgia's had for a long time. Back in the 90s, Tennessee and Florida dominated Georgia. They had the best of them. There's a lot of hatred between those 3 teams. But for Georgia to be able to reel off 4 straight against Florida, 8 straight against Tennessee, and keep that dominance going, even in a year in which Tennessee made the playoffs, that's my high for Georgia.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with the obvious one. SEC championship winner,
Right.
to battle through the gauntlet of a schedule that they had to battle through this year. They were very much deserving of this. They were the best team by far, obviously, in the SEC. Predicted number 1, finished number 1. Trevor Etienne that game dominated. Gunnar Stockton coming in for Carson Beck, just doing enough to get the job done. So I think that the winning and how they won the SEC championship game to hold on after being down at half, to fight through adversity in the second half, that's the highest of the highs for them this year.
My 1B for them, highest of high, would be Kirby Smart calling out Commissioner Sankey in the acceptance speech in Atlanta, stared him right in the face and told him that they were pretty much screwed over by their schedule and having to play the toughest teams in the conference on the road. Meanwhile, Texas skates by with playing 1 ranked team all season long.
Yep, absolutely. And so my low ties into the whole Gunnar Stockton Cinderella story with, I really do think that Carson Beck getting hurt in the long run was their low. They couldn't hit big plays in the playoff game against Notre Dame. They really couldn't get any offense going. And you know, we discussed Notre Dame won off of, you know, special teams and big plays. Georgia, I thought, did enough, you know, to keep it close, but the offense just couldn't get anything going.
Yeah, I've really got about 3 or 4 that I would like to say. I mean, there's so much you could say about Georgia whenever you look at the lowest of lows. I could have said Mike Bobo. I'm just not a big Mike Bobo fan, not a big fan of his play calling. He lives and dies by the short pass and the screens way too much. We could have said receivers dropping passes. I mean, if their receivers hauled in half of the passes over 20 yards that they dropped, they would have been top 10 in the country in explosive passing plays.
Mm-hmm.
But my lowest of low for them has to be falling to the University of Alabama in Kalen DeBoer's first year. This was a game that they had circled. They've struggled mightily with Alabama. Kirby Smart was 1-5 going into the game. His one win was in the 2021 national championship game when Alabama had some guys banged up. This was their chance, and they just came out in the first half and just laid an absolute egg. We're getting blown out of the waters. Now, credit to them for the attempted comeback that they made. They also kind of had the clock in their favor. And I know that sounds crazy when you say, well, they're down by 3 scores. How's the clock in their favor? Because they were able to be in desperation mode and go for it on every single 4th down and know that they had 4 downs to get a first. But to lose in Kalen DeBoer's first year and fall to 1-6 all time against Alabama has to be my lowest of low for Georgia and Kirby Smart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. Final grade. Yeah, final grades. I gave him just an A, just a flat A, 94. I thought their ceiling this year it's different for them. You could say, just because preseason, aspirations for them are already through the roof. They just get the Nick Saban treatment now of, it's either going to be Georgia, Texas, Alabama, boom, right there. And that's how it is. And I just gave them a flat A. Yes, they won the SEC championship game. Yes, they had the toughest schedule in all of college football, and they handled it superbly. I just think that the Carson Beck injury really threw a wrinkle in things, and I really think they should have made the semifinals and on into the national championship game.
So my grade for them is going to seem like it's a little bit harsh. I'm going to say B+. And
wow,
my reason for that is when you go back to the Notre Dame game, Notre Dame out-physicaled them. Notre Dame went toe-to-toe with them in the trenches, did just enough, made the big plays on special teams. And when you look at Georgia, yeah, they lost 3 games, but in all 3 games that they lost, you can go back and you could say they really beat themselves. And that's just not characteristic of a Kirby Smart coached football team. So the fact that they pretty much just beat themselves 3 times, like we mentioned, the drop passes, the poor play calling, I don't want to say they got dominated, but they just didn't dominate like we're accustomed to seeing. The fact that Notre Dame was able to go toe-to-toe with them in a playoff game was just eye-opening for me. Their defense was not what we've seen the past few years. Their rushing offense ranked in the 80s. They were not able to run the football consistently. I just think that they underachieved, and I'll say B+.
Yeah, okay. Harsh. It's not really harsh. I agree with everything that you're saying. Final thoughts, man. Flying through these episodes.
So my final thought is coaches like Matt Rule, Steve Sarkisian, who are saying that they are canceling their spring game because the spring game is just an opportunity for other coaches to look at their rosters and look at their backups and try to backdoor, tamper, and channel and make offers for the spring portal. That's the biggest bunch of garbage that I have ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Spring football and spring games are what make the SEC so wonderful. When you have 90,000 fans go to Tuscaloosa, you've got 50, 60,000 fans going to Georgia and Texas and all these other places. It's a time for fans to come together in the spring and start getting your mind on football. It kind of scratches the itch a little bit. And here's something that these coaches need to think about is the industry boom. When you look at these college towns, even for a spring game, even if you have 25 or 30,000 people show up, which every single SEC school is going to have 20, 25, 30,000, with maybe the exception of Vanderbilt, That's 25 or 30,000 people that's going to buy a tank of gas in your city. They're
Yep.
going to buy a hot dog at the game. They're going to buy a cold drink at the game. Many of those are going to stay in a hotel room the night before the game. It just brings a lot of tax dollars. It brings a lot of revenue and stuff into your college town. And to just completely cancel that game and not have any sympathy for the business owners, the hotel managers, the restaurant owners, and all that stuff, because you're so insecure about somebody backdoor tampering with your team. That's going to happen regardless. That's going to happen. So I think that's just bull crap to me. That's my final thought. Hashtag save spring football.
I love it. Hey, comment that below. Hashtag save spring ball. Sark is a sissy. That's what we're going to say.
Matt Rule sucks. Sark's a sissy. Save spring football.
Save it. Save it.
And we're not talking about the USFL, go Birmingham Stallions, by the way, but save spring football.
Oh, absolutely. Love it. That's where we're going to end, guys, on that final thought right there. Please leave your final thoughts in the comments too. I mean, who knows? It could be a subject that we talk about later in life. Who knows? I need everyone that watches this. I need you to share it with a friend. Like below, subscribe, hit the notifications bell on the YouTube. Follow us everywhere and get us out there, baby, okay? Join the mob. Hashtag join the mob. Hashtag save spring training. What you're
trying to say is...
What?
All right, see you guys.
I'm serious. Do it.